Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're interested in Z80 Assembly Language programming, then you've come to the right place, because today we're going to be taking a detailed look at a Z80 Assembly Language program, a game actually. And this game was actually developed as a tutorial for learning Z80 Assembly Language programming. And I know we're jumping ahead a little bit in our game development journey because we haven't taken really too much of a look at any of the Z80 Assembly Language instructions yet. We've taken a look at a couple of them, but we haven't really explored too many of them in depth yet. We'll be doing that in future videos, but I think it would be useful to take a look at some instructions and also the structure of a Z80 Assembly Language program. So in case you're not really familiar with assembly language programming and you might be wondering what it's all about, how do the instructions work, and really what does an assembly language program look like and how does it work, we're going to be taking a detailed look at some assembly language instructions and see how they're used in this game. And I'm going to show you actually where I found this game online so you can take a look at it for yourself. Alright, now before we get started here, I should let you know that in order to be able to follow along with me and understand what it is I'm explaining, you're going to need to be familiar with both binary and hexadecimal. So if you haven't already watched my video on binary and hexadecimal counting systems, you may want to go back and watch it. And I'll also be working in the ZX Spin development environment today using the assembler and the debugger there. So if you want to follow along with me on your computer, you could install the ZX Spin environment on your computer as well if you like. And I have a video that explains how to do that also. It's very easy to do. So let's get started here. Alright, so first let me show you the program I'm talking about and where I found it. And it is on this website here, which is chutney.wordpress.com, and then a bunch of other information up here, which is why I've titled this game Chutney Racer, because it's a racing program, and I found it on this Chutney site here, and it's titled Bytes Chutney up at the top there. So I'll put a link to this in my video description that you can just cut and paste if you want to navigate to this website as well. And here it's titled Tutorial, ZX Spectrum Machine Code Game in 30 minutes. And it's going to take us longer than 30 minutes to go through it. So today is quite a detailed, in-depth video. We're going to be covering the Z80 Assembly Language instructions, some of them at least, in detail. So it's going to be a bit involved today. So we're going to be going through these things to really get an understanding of them, how they work. So let me just read the introduction here. It says, "Hi folks, I'm a machine code novice who coded a very small road race game to help me learn. I reckon you can learn the basics of machine code in half an hour by coding this game step by step. This tutorial assumes you have a working knowledge of ZX Spectrum Basic and the ZX Spin emulator. Make yourself a large cup of tea. By the time you've drunk it, you'll be able to program in machine code." Now, if we take a look down here, farther down the page, we can see the complete listing for this program. And actually the way that this tutorial is laid out on this website, some people might find it a bit confusing because although it goes step by step through the different parts of the program, explaining how the program lines work, it does it in such a way where it has you enter a small portion of the program into the assembler, and then it kind of modifies it by asking you to add lines and change lines and modify lines throughout this tutorial. So what I'm going to do is just skip right down to the end of this article where it shows the entire listing for the program, which is right here. It says a full listing follows with my email address at the end for your comments and suggestions. So here you can see we have the entire listing of the program. So I'm just going to copy and paste this into the ZX Spin assembler. So there we have our assembler open, and I'm just going to paste the program into the assembler window here, just like that. So you can see here's the entire program now in the assembler listing window. And we're going to be going through this program, not exactly line by line, but we're going to be looking at it in quite a bit of detail and familiarize ourselves with the assembly language instructions that are included here. So the first thing I want to look at here is this org instruction at the top. It says org 33,000. So that's where the program is going to be loaded into memory once the assembler assembles it and converts it into machine code, as you probably know. So let's go ahead and assemble it now, and I'm going to do that by, well, I'll go to the menu here and do File, Assemble, and it asks me the starting address here, which I don't need to enter because it's already shown in our listing here at org 33,000. So I'm just going to click OK here. And now our program should be assembled. And if we take a look at the output here from the assembler, it says assembling, no errors in 118 lines, 164 bytes generated. So there were no errors. That means our program assembled successfully, and it should now be stored in memory beginning at address 33,000. So as you probably know already, if you've watched any of my other videos on machine code or assembly language, the way we're going to run this program is by going into the emulator here, and I'm going to enter a basic program, line 100, randomize, user, 33,000. So this will execute the machine code program that's stored in memory beginning at address 33,000. So let's go ahead and run it now. And there you can see we have our racing program. So what this program does is it generates kind of a pseudo random track that scrolls downward on the screen, and your racing car is the little blue square at the bottom, and you use the lower rows of keys to steer your car left and right. In this case, I'm using the V and B keys to move left and right. So let's run it again. And now I use the V and B keys on my keyboard to just move my car left and right through this track. And it's actually a fun little program. When you try it out, it's actually enjoyable to play just in the format that it is here. And then you crash. So this is the program that we're going to be taking a look at. It's a simple program, but it demonstrates, well, obviously a functioning working game, as simple as it is. It's still a fun game, and the instructions that are used to create it are very interesting to look at to see how these assembly language instructions work. Alright, so hopefully you're comfortable and you have your brain switched on and you're ready to go, because we're going to get our hands dirty now and take a detailed look at some of these Z80 assembly language instructions. So first I'm just going to reorganize my screen a bit here. I'll shrink the window size of this, move this over here, move this over there, so we can see what we're doing a bit better. And the way I'm actually going to be looking at this program is by using the Debugger, which is a really cool and useful tool. And the way we open it is by going over here to the Tools section on this menu and choosing Debugger right here. And there you can see our program listing in the Debugger window. And this is going to be really useful for us because we're going to be using this intensively and looking at the instructions and the memory locations and even the flags and the register contents. So we're really going to get a good introduction to Z80 assembly language instructions. And if you're not really understanding what all these instructions do and how they work, don't really worry about it just yet, because like I said, this is just kind of an overview introduction to Z80 assembly language programming, just to give people a kind of a feel of what Z80 assembly language programs are like and what it's like to create a program using assembly language. So we don't need to be too worried about understanding every instruction, although we're going to do our best to go through them and really take a detailed look at them. So if you're ready, we'll get started right now. And so first, let's go up here to our listing, and we'll just take a look at the first section here, line by line. And this pink word here that says main, you probably already know it's a label, which means it's not an actual Z80 assembly language instruction, but rather it's an assembler directive, meaning it doesn't get converted into machine code when the program gets assembled. So this word main here is actually a label that kind of points to a location in memory. So this first instruction in our program here, DI, which we'll get to in a moment, is going to be stored in memory as machine code bytes once the program gets converted into machine code when we assemble it. And of course, every instruction is going to be stored in memory, in some location in memory, when it gets converted to machine code. And this main label here is just a word that identifies the location in memory. So for example, when this assembler uses this word main, it uses it as a pointer to a location in memory where a particular instruction is being stored. So in this case, this main word would point to the location where this DI instruction is being stored, because DI is the first instruction in this particular program. And since we know our program is going to be starting at location 33,000 in memory, and this 33,000 is a decimal value, so it's not a hexadecimal value, obviously it's not a binary value, and we'll be dealing with all three of those types of numbers in today's video: binary, hexadecimal, and decimal. So this org instruction here is another assembler directive that instructs the assembler to save our machine code program in memory beginning at location 33,000. So let's go take a look at that. So I'm going to go down to the debugger window here. So if you have your ZX Spin environment open and you're looking at the debugger window as well, and you've copy and pasted this assembly language program into your assembler as well, after you assemble the program, it should be stored in memory beginning at location 33,000. So let's go take a look at location 33,000 in memory. And that's very easy to do. All we need to do is come down here to our debugger window. And you might want to take a look at this view selection up here where it says hex numbers and decimal numbers. You can choose whether you want this disassembler window or this debugger window to display the numbers in hexadecimal or decimal format. So for now I'm going to leave it in decimal format, which it is, and I'm going to go to this address window, and it's highlighted here. So in this address window I'm going to enter the address 33,000. And there it brings up the address 33,000 in our listing window down here. Now we can take a look at the memory contents, and if we take a look at address 33,000, which is right here, we can see the byte that is stored at that location has a value of 243 in decimal, and the associated assembly language instruction that corresponds to that code is right here, DI, which is exactly what we would expect, because up here in our assembler window we see the first line of our program is DI. So what does DI do? DI stands for disable interrupt, and I'm just going to go to this website Z80 Heaven, z80-heaven.wiki.com/instruction set, and here we see a listing of all the Z80 instructions that we can take a look at. So I'm going to go and take a look at this DI instruction that's in our assembler program, first of all, which is right here. So if I click on this, it shows me what the DI instruction actually does. And so if we look here, the syntax for it is DI. It has no other options we can add to it. It's just DI all by itself. So what does the DI instruction actually do? Well, if you look right here, it says the DI disables the interrupts, which is what DI stands for, disable interrupts, both mode 1 and mode 2. So if you're not already familiar with interrupts, as I explained in the video that I made on the internal architecture of 8-bit microcomputers, and you can go back and take a look at that one if you haven't already seen it, it explains that the computer is operated by the Z80 microprocessor, and that's the chip inside the computer that's actually running our program. And one of the pins that's connected to that chip is an interrupt pin. And there are different types of interrupts, and how they work is while the computer is running the program, or while the microprocessor is executing the program instructions, it can be interrupted by certain electronic signals being applied to the interrupt pins on the Z80 chip. So there are different types of interrupts. As you can see here, it says mode 1 and mode 2 interrupts. I'm not going to go into all the different modes of the different types of interrupts, mainly because I'm not familiar with all the different modes of interrupts, but there are two main types of interrupts we should be familiar with. One is maskable interrupts and one is non-maskable interrupts. So maskable interrupts are normal interrupts that can interrupt the microprocessor but can also be disabled. So regular interrupts are what's known as maskable interrupts, and they can be disabled using this DI command, which our program is doing. So in this case, the program is using the DI or disable interrupt command to disable interrupts like the keyboard and so forth, because it's not interested in reading the keyboard at this particular point in the program, but it will be re-enabling the interrupt, and we can watch for that later. It will be re-enabling the interrupts later when we actually read the keyboard so that we can move our car left and right on the screen. And the other type of interrupt that I mentioned is a non-maskable interrupt, and this is an interrupt that can't be disabled. And we can see an example of this. For example, if you own a ZX Spectrum Next personal computer, there's a button on the side of it which is actually labeled NMI, which stands for non-maskable interrupt. So when you press that button, no matter what the computer is doing, it will go to the non-maskable interrupt routine that's been configured in the computer, and it'll bring up a menu. So there are two types of interrupts, maskable and non-maskable. And if we go back to our program here, we can see that this program is using the disable interrupt instruction to disable the maskable interrupts. So let's move on to our next instruction here, which is LDHL 22537. And we can see it down here in our disassembler window here as well, LDHL 22537. So what does that do? Well, the LD instruction is short for load, and that loads, in this case, a value into a register, or in this case, a register pair. So what this is going to do is load the value 22537, which is a decimal value, into the HL register pair. And luckily for us, we can take a look at our registers right over here in this window here. And you can see that the HL register pair currently contains a value of 4264. So if we were to execute this instruction now, LDHL 22537, that should load the HL register pair with this value, 22537. So let's go ahead and execute that instruction. So how can we execute that one instruction in this disassembler window? Well, in the debugger here, we can take a look over at this window and we see here there's a PC register. And the PC register is the program counter register, which keeps track of the memory address that contains the next instruction that's going to be executed in our program. So let's just change this value by double clicking on it here. And I'm going to change it to this address here, 33001, because that's the address that contains this LDHL instruction that I want to execute. So I'm going to change this value here to 33001, just like that. So the way I'm going to be executing instructions in this debugger window is I'm going to step through them one at a time. So I'm going to execute the instructions individually rather than running the entire program at once. And the way I do that is by setting the program counter, which we've just done, to the address of the instruction that we want to execute. And then I'm going to go over here to this step button up here. And when I click step, that will indicate just the instruction that's stored at that one particular memory location. So now if we click the step button, it will execute this instruction with the green arrow next to it, which says LDHL 22537, which we should expect to change this value in the HL register pair to 22537. So let's go ahead and press the step button and see what happens. And there we go. The HL register pair now contains the value of 22537, which is exactly what we expected it to do based on this instruction that we were just looking at. So that's the load instruction, and we loaded a decimal value into the HL register pair. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next instruction now, which is push HL. So what does push do? Well, we haven't covered yet the topic of the stack, and the stack is a special location in the computer memory that is reserved for pushing and popping values. And what does pushing and popping values mean? It means just storing them into this memory location. So for example, if we take a look over here at this button labeled stack, we'll click on that, and these memory addresses have been reserved as the stack. So these are memory locations that we can use in our program to push and pop values onto and off of. So we can use this as a temporary storage location for values. And the way the stack works is it starts at a certain address and then counts down. So every time you push a value onto the stack, meaning into the memory locations where the stack has been assigned, it will store values into memory at that location and then lower the pointer for the stack so that the addresses continually go down and down as you push new values onto the stack. So if we take a look here, we can see that in this case, the stack has started at address 65535. And these darkened numbers are actual active values in our stack. So the stack in this case starts at 65535, and if we scroll all the way up, which is maybe confusing because in this window it shows the numbers listed going upwards, but actually the values are going down. You see it starts at 65535, then the next one is 65533, 65531, and you can see that the values count down in multiples of 2, because every time you push a value onto the stack or store a value onto the stack, the values always get stored as 2 bytes. So if we take a look now at what the next memory location is, we'll just scroll up here until we reach the top of these darkened numbers. And it looks like our stack ends right here at address 65353. So that address currently contains the value of 21, and then the next address, which is right here, 65351, is ready to store the next value that gets pushed onto the stack. So when I go ahead and execute this instruction here, which says push HL, it's going to push the value that's currently stored in HL onto the stack. Or in other words, it's going to take the value that's currently stored in the HL register pair and store it into memory that has been reserved for the stack. So let's take a look at the HL register pair right now and see what value it contains. So if I go back over here to the registers tab, we can see the HL register pair contains a value of 22537. Now, one thing I just want to show you before we continue is that this debugger has a feature where we can change the view of the register pairs. So if we go over here to the view button and we click on this 8-bit registers selection, What that will do is it will split up these register pairs into their individual registers. So if I click on this now, and we go back here and take a look at the HL register pair, we can see that it's now been split up into the H register, which contains a value of 88, and the L register, which contains a value of 9. So let's just go back to our view menu and disable that 8-bit register selection to combine the HL registers into a pair again. So now we can see the 16-bit value that's stored in the HL register pair, which is 22537. So now when we execute this push HL command, we would expect that that value that's currently stored in HL, which we can see right here is 22537, would get pushed onto the stack. And if we take a look at the stack, the next available address in the stack is 65351. And so let's go ahead and push this HL value onto the stack by clicking our step button here and see what happens. And there you can see the address 65351 now contains a value of 22537, which is the value that's in our HL register pair. And if we take a look up here, there's another register called SP, which stands for stack pointer. And you can see the value of this is now 65351, which if we take a look at our stack, is the address that contains the last value that was pushed onto the stack. Okay, so hopefully this is all making sense so far. And if you're finding it confusing, if perhaps you're not familiar with Z80 Assembly Language, I really recommend that you go back and take a look at my machine code video, part 1, and that will introduce you to the registers in the Z80 microprocessor, as well as, if you're not already familiar with binary and hexadecimal, that will obviously really be important to understanding the content of this video. So you may want to go back and watch that bits, bytes, binary, and hexadecimal video that I mentioned earlier. But so far, if everything is kind of making sense to you and you're interested in learning more, then feel free to go ahead and watch the rest of this video. And we're going to be covering even more instructions and going more in depth and continuing on with what we've started so far. And then at the end, we're going to be taking a look at how we can make some modifications to this game to, for example, extract the score that is generated from this game. And there's a lot we're going to be covering, but if you're finding it interesting, just stick with it and you'll really get an idea of what's involved in making a machine code or assembly language program. So let's get going. Alright, so let's get back to our program and take a look and see what our next instruction is we have to investigate. And it looks like it is an XOR instruction, and you can see here it's XOR A. So XOR is a logical instruction that is used to manipulate the bits within a byte, and we learned all about bits and bytes in our previous videos. So this is going to take a look at the bits within a byte and perform some logical function on them. And in this case, the function that it's going to be performing is the logical XOR instruction. So if you're not already familiar with logical instructions like and OR and exclusive OR, so this XOR instruction is what's known as exclusive OR, and you can kind of get an idea about how these logical instructions work. For example, when you're comparing two bits and you want them both to be the same, you would use the AND instruction. So both bits have to be, let's say, 1. So this bit has to be 1 and this bit has to be 1. So that would use an AND instruction to indicate that both bits need to be set, for example. Now, if you only want one bit to be set, but the other one, it doesn't matter if it's set or not, then you could use an OR instruction. So this bit could be set or this bit could be set. Now, in this case, we have what's known as an exclusive OR instruction or an XOR instruction. So that means when we're comparing two bits, that means that one of the bits has to be on, but the other one has to be off. So in this case, both bits can't be on and both bits can't be off. One bit needs to be on and the other bit needs to be off. And let's go back to our Z80 Heaven website here and take a look at how this instruction actually works. I'll just go back to the instruction sheet here and look for this instruction, which is right here, XOR. And let's see what it does. It says XOR is an instruction that takes one 8-bit input and compares it with the accumulator. So that's what I was mentioning about comparing one bit to another bit. In this case, what it does is it doesn't just compare one bit, it compares all of the bits within a byte. So in this case, it says it takes one 8-bit input, and we specify what the input will be, and it compares that with the accumulator. So whatever input we give it, it's going to compare it to the accumulator. So if we go back to our program here, we can see that we're doing an XOR on the A accumulator. So actually the input that we're giving it is the A accumulator. So it's going to be doing this instruction on itself because it's going to compare our input with the accumulator, and the input we're giving it is the A accumulator. So this instruction is going to perform an exclusive OR operation between the A accumulator and the A accumulator. And you might be wondering, why would anyone do this? What's the point of comparing the A accumulator with itself? Well, since this is an exclusive OR instruction and only one of the bits can be on, obviously if you're comparing the A accumulator to the A accumulator, the bits are all going to be the same. And with an exclusive OR instruction, both bits cannot be the same, otherwise the result will be 0. So in effect, the purpose of this instruction is basically to set the A register to 0. So it's a way that we can set all the bits in the A register to 0. And I'm just going to go back to the website, and we can see here there's a truth table that explains how it works. So if we're comparing two bits, and let's say the first bit is 0 and the second bit is 0, the result will be 0 because only one bit can be 0. The bits need to be different for an exclusive OR. In our second example here, if the input is 0 and 1, the result will be 1 or true because one bit is exclusively set and the other bit is off. And similarly with the third example here, the first bit is set and the second bit is off, which results in a value of 1, which is true. So exclusive OR means that one bit is set and the other bit is off. And then in the final instruction here, both bits are set, 1 and 1. So 1 is being compared to 1. They're both the same. There's no exclusivity. They're both set. So only one of them is allowed to be set. Therefore, the result is false, which gives us a result of 0. So going back to our program now, what this instruction will do is set all of the bits in the A register to 0. And one more thing we can take a look at is if we go back to that website, we can see some more details about this instruction. For example, right here it lists the acceptable inputs, and you can do XOR A, XOR B, you can do XOR with all these different registers, and down here you can do XOR with the contents of a memory location. And remember, all these comparisons are comparing to the accumulator. And let's take a look at what effect this instruction has on the flag register. One thing that's interesting to take note of, and something that's very valuable and necessary to take note of, when we're looking at Z80 instructions, we always want to take note of what effect that instruction will have on the bits in the flag register, because we use the bits in the flag register for comparison in order to determine the operation of our program. So in this case, the effects are C and N flags are cleared, PV is parity, and the rest are modified by definition. So that might not really make sense to you if you're not familiar with Z80 assembly language. So let's just take part of it. For example, C and N flags are cleared. So let's take a look at the flag register. And if we look at this website here, z80.info/z80sflag.htm, it explains how the Z80 flag register works. So if we take a look here, and this is the Z80 flag register, and we know that the Z80 flag register contains bits which indicate different things to us, and usually the bits in the flag register will be affected by operations such as arithmetic operations and so forth. And here are the different bits in the flag register listed by their number. From 0 to 7, we covered bit numbers in a previous video, so the bits are numbered from 0 to 7, starting from the right-hand bit. And if we take a look here, I'll just zoom in a bit, we can see that bit number 0 has a label of C, and if we look down here, this is called the carry bit. And the purpose of it is that it gets set if the result did not fit in the register. So what does that mean? That means if we're doing some operation on a byte, and a byte obviously contains bits. So for example, let's say we're shifting bits in a byte, and we're shifting those bits off the end of the byte, then that means the result didn't fit in the register because we're shifting the bits out the end of the register. And we'll be looking at the shift instruction in a later video. But for example, any operation that moves the bits out of the register will set this carry flag. So let's take a look at the next bit in the flag register, which is bit 1 here, labeled as N, and let's see what that does. N is called the subtract bit, and it gets set if the last operation was a subtraction. So that's pretty straightforward. If we perform a subtraction in our program, we would expect this N bit in the flag register to be set. The next bit is bit number 2, which is labeled as PV, and down here we see that PV stands for parity or overflow. It should really be PO, I suppose, but they use V to represent overflow. So this is the parity / overflow bit, and parity set if even number of bits are set. So if we do a calculation or a manipulation with the bits in a byte and the result is an even number of bits, then this parity bit will be set. Now this bit can also act as an overflow bit, and let's see what that does. It says overflow set if the 2 complement result does not fit in the register. 2's complement is used, for example, for indicating negative values within a byte. So in this case, it says if the 2's complement result does not fit in the register, which is kind of like the operation that we looked at as a carry bit if the result does not fit in the register. So this would be the overflow function of the parity overflow bit. And so if the result doesn't fit in the register and this bit is acting as an overflow function, then this would be set in that case. All right, so let's take a look at the next bit in the flag register, which is bit number 3, which is labeled here F3. And this says undocumented flag, copy of bit 3. I think this bit is actually not used. I don't know what this means exactly, but I'm not sure if this bit is actually used or not. So let's move on to the next one. Bit number 4 is labeled as H, and this is labeled half carry from bit 3 to bit 4. So some people find this operation confusing. I'm not sure why, because it's really quite straightforward. As we covered in our bits and bytes video, a byte is made up of 2 nibbles, and a nibble is 4 bits. So obviously a byte contains 8 bits, which is 2 groupings of 4 bits. So all this means is if there's a carry from bit 3 to bit 4, that means if we fill up 4 bits, and then the result of whatever operation we're performing moves into the 5th bit, which is bit 4. Remember, the first 3 bits are labeled 0, 1, 2, and 3. If we're performing some operation where the result moves the contents of those bits into now the 5th bit, which is bit number 4, then this half carry flag is set. And we're going to be testing that in an upcoming video when we actually go through the different commands. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to test. So just keep an eye out for that one. We'll be covering that one a bit later. So let's look at our next bit here in the flag register, which is bit number 5, and it's labeled as F5. And this one also says undocumented flag, copy of bit 5. So maybe this bit is not used either. I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is bit 6 here, labeled as Z or Z, depending where you live. This is the 0 flag, and this one is very straightforward. It gets set if the value is 0. So if we do some mathematical or arithmetic operation, for example, and the result is 0, then this flag gets set. And by set, we mean turned on. So it gets set to 1. These bits can obviously only have a value of either 0 or 1. So setting a bit would turn it on, which means setting it to the value of 1. And the last bit in our flag register here is bit number 7, which is labeled S. And this is known as the sign flag or the sign bit. And this one gets set if the 2 complement value is negative, copy of most significant bit. So this might sound confusing, but it's not confusing at all, because basically how this works is if you're using signed numbers, meaning normally the decimal value of a byte, for example, ranges from decimal 0 to decimal 255, which would represent all of the bits turned on in a byte. However, you can also use bytes to indicate negative values, which is done using this 2's complement calculation, which you can research and figure out exactly how that works. But basically all we need to know about this is when the most significant bit in a byte is turned on, or bit number 7 is turned on, that's the bit that's on the far left hand side of the byte. If that is turned on, and if we're using that byte to indicate negative and positive values, then a negative value would be indicated by that leftmost bit or the most significant bit being turned on. So now let's read this description again and see if it makes any more sense. So it says the sign flag gets set if the 2's complement value is negative. So 2's complement is the process we use to determine negative values. And so if the value is negative, then this flag gets set. And here it says copy of MSB, which means the most significant bit, MSB. If that's turned on, that means the value is negative. So if the value is negative, then this sign flag is also going to be turned on. So if the most significant bit is turned on, then the sign flag is also turned on because they both indicate a negative number. And that's what it means here by copy of MSB. The value of this sign flag bit will be the same as the value of the MSB, or the most significant bit. So we're back in our emulator here, and if we take a look at the registers, here are the flag bits right here. One of the registers is called the flag register, which is also known as the F register, which is actually right here. You can see F. It's often paired up with A, because it can be paired up with A to make an AF pair. So in this case, we have an A register and a flag register paired up. So let's just split those apart by going over here to View, 8-bit registers. And if we go back over here, we can see the value of the F register contains 92 in decimal. And that 92 corresponds with the value of these individual bits down here that are being indicated by this flags register. And remember, we covered in our bits and bytes video how we can convert from bit values to decimal values. So that means that if these bits are in this state with these 4 turned on, you see these 4 with the check marks in them. So if we convert these bits to decimal, the combined value of these bits should equal 92. Well, we can do a quick test now just to see if that's true. So for example, if we take the least significant bit here, which is currently turned off, we know that that should have a decimal value of 1. So if I turn this on now by clicking on it, we should expect to see this 92 value increase to 93. So let's try that. I'll click this on, and there we go. It went up to 93. And now we know the value of the next bit over should have a decimal value of 2. So if I turn that on, this 93 should change to 95. So let's see if that works. Yep, there it is, 95. So now what I want to do, I'm actually going to keep these 2 bits turned on, the N bit and the C bit, because if we go back to our Z80 Heaven website and we look again at the instructions for our XOR command, which is the instruction we're going to be executing next, it says down here the effects of executing this XOR command is going to clear the C and N flags. It says here C and N flags cleared. So that is what effect it has on the C and N flags. It's going to clear them, which means it's going to set them to 0. So now if we go back to our emulator and we have our C and N flags currently turned on, we would expect that once we execute this XOR A instruction, it's going to turn these 2 flags off, because that's what the Z80 Heaven website just said the effect of this instruction will do. So that's one thing we're going to watch for when we execute this instruction. But the main thing this instruction is designed to do is to set the value of the A register to 0, right? Because it's comparing A with itself, and they have to be exclusive, which they're not because they're the same. So now, as you can see here, the A register is already 0. So what if we set that manually to some value? So I'll double click on it here, and I'll just set that value to, let's say, 5, and press enter. So now our A register contains a value of 5. And we would expect when we execute this instruction, the A register would go to 0, and these 2 flags at least would get cleared, the C flag and the N flag. So let's go ahead and click our step button and see what happens. So there we go. We see the A register now has a value of 0, and the N and C flags have been turned off. So this really, I think, is a good indication of what Z80 Assembly Language programming is all about. Obviously, there's a lot more to Z80 Assembly Language programming than just what we've looked at, and we're still going to be looking at a lot more. There are many more instructions in this program that we can look at and learn a lot from, and we're going to do that. But I think the interesting thing that we can see from what we've learned so far is that the actual instructions within the Z80 Assembly Language are not difficult. It's not particularly complicated to transfer values from a register to a memory location and back and forth, and incrementing and decrementing, and the different logical and arithmetic instructions that are performed by the Z80 Assembly Language instructions are really not complicated in themselves. It seems to me that the difficult thing about Z80 Assembly Language is really trying to put all these instructions together in the right order to get the program to do what we want it to do. So let's just continue on, and we'll prove that by taking a look at some of these other instructions and just seeing how they work and how uncomplicated they are to understand. And if we go on to our next one here, for example, our next instruction you can see here is LD brackets HL comma A. So again, this is a load instruction. That's LD means load, right? So we're going to load the contents of the A register into, and the brackets in this case mean a memory location. So we're not going to be loading a value into the HL register pair this time because it has brackets around it. That means we're going to be loading a value into a memory location. That's what the brackets mean, memory location. So in this case, we're going to be loading the value that's in the A register into the memory location that's being pointed to by the HL register pair. So first, let's go take a look at the HL register pair, and here it is right here. Oh, well, we've got them split up now into two individual registers. The H register contains a value of 88, and the L register contains a value of 9. So let's go back to our view menu option and turn off the 8-bit register selection. So that will show us the combined 16-bit value that's contained within the HL register pair, which in this case is 22537. So let's go and take a look at what value is contained in this memory location 22537. And all we need to do that is we go up here and click on this address, and we change this value to 22537. Enter. So if we look down here, 22537, which is right here, actually, okay, this is interesting to look at because in this case, we don't see the actual address of 22537. We see 22536 and we see 22538 because this disassembler is interpreting the contents of these memory addresses as instructions, and some instructions take more than 1 byte, right? So in this case, it's just showing us the contents of this address 22537 right here, because 22536 contains this value here of 56, and then 22537 would contain this value here also of 56. So let's go back to our program instruction now. I'm just going to search for it by entering 33,000 up there again. And the next program instruction to be executed, as we can see here by our program counter register, is at the address 33006. So if we look at 33006, it says load B, 24. So we can actually do that instruction first. It's a very simple instruction. It's just going to load the value 24 into the B register. And so right now, let's go over here to the view, 8-bit registers, and we can see the B register currently contains a value of 23. So if I step this instruction now, it should load the value of 24 into the B register. So I'll step it now, and there we go. We have a value of 24 loaded into the B register. Very straightforward. So now we're at our load brackets HL comma A instruction, and we can see what that's going to do is load the value that's in the A register into the memory location pointed at by the HL register pair. So the HL register pair contains a value of 22537. So let's split up our AF register pair into its individual registers now by turning on this 8-bit register selection again. We have to go back and forth and do this often because we need to see both the 16-bit and the 8-bit values sometimes. So here we see the A register contains a value of 0. So now if we execute this command, LD brackets HL A, it should load the value of 0, which is in the A register, into the memory location pointed at by the HL register pair, which I'll go turn this off again, and the HL register pair contains 22537. So now this should load a value of 0 into 22537. So we'll go ahead and execute that. And now let's go take a look at the address 22537, and it should contain a value of 0. And 22537 would be right here. And you can see it does contain a value of 0. See, it's pretty straightforward how these commands work. So I'll just go back to our next instruction to be executed. And what is the address of our next instruction to be executed? Well, we can see that easily right here by checking our program counter register. It's pointing at the address 33009. So we know that that's the next instruction that's going to be executed. So that's where I'm going to go look, is 33009. And don't get confused by the difference between this address window here and this program counter. Remember, this address window whatever number we put in there, that's just going to display that address in our disassembly listing here. However, this program counter value, that's the one that really indicates which instruction is actually going to be executed next. As you can see here, this one indicates 33009, which is right here, 33009, which has an INC HL instruction. Now these instructions are kind of getting simpler, so let's go ahead and check what this one does. INC HL, as you can probably guess, is increment HL, and it's going to increment the value of the HL register pair, which right now contains 22537, and if we execute this, that should go to 22538, right? So let's go ahead and step through that, and there we go. HL now contains a value of 22538. That makes sense. Let's see what other interesting commands we might want to look at. Okay, how about this one? Add HL, DE. So let's change our program counter to point at this instruction, which is at address 33014. So I'll just go up here and change this to 33014. And now, even though the green arrow is still pointing at our last command, when I press the step button, it's going to actually execute the command in memory location 33014, because that's what the program counter is pointing at, and the program counter makes the final decision. So 33014 contains the instruction add HL, DE. So remember, the result of these operations always end up in whatever operand is on the left side of the comma. So in this case, what this is going to do, actually, why don't we check it out? And you can use this method to research how these commands work for yourself. So I'm just going to go back to the Z80 Heaven website. And now let's look for the add HL, DE instruction. So here's add right here. And if I click on this, we can see down here, there is an instruction add HL, DE. So there's all kinds of add instructions we can see here. And let's see what it does. It says right here, the values of the two operands are added together, and the result is written back to the first one. And while we're here, let's take a look at what effect it's going to have on the flag register. So if we look down here under the effects, it has two different sections actually. This one has a section labeled 8-bit arithmetic, and it has a section labeled 16-bit arithmetic. And what does that mean? Well, that's very simple. If we look up here at these different add instructions, you can see some of them, for example, add AA. Those are using 8-bit values because they're using 8-bit registers. The A register, for example, can only contain a single byte, which is 8 bits. Same as this instruction here, add A, B. For example, the A register and the B register both contain 8 bits. So in that case, this effect would apply because those are 8-bit arithmetic functions. However, if we use 16-bit arithmetic functions, like the one in our program, which is right here, add HL, DE. So HL and DE are 16-bit register pairs. That means we need to look at this 16-bit arithmetic effect. And what are the effects that this instruction is going to have on the flag register? Well, it's going to preserve the S, Z, or Z, and PV flags. And H is undefined. Rest of flags modified by definition. So these are the effects it's going to have on the different bits in the flag register. It's going to preserve the S, Z, and PV flags, for example, which means those bits wouldn't change as a result of this operation. So let's go back to our assembler now. And the description of this instruction said that it's going to add the contents of these two registers together and place the result in the first operand, which is HL here. So if we take a look at the values of these HL and DE register pairs, HL contains 22538 and DE contains 23575. Well, those are kind of difficult to remember, so let's change these values to something that we can test more easily. So let's just change this one to, let's say, 5. There. So now the DE register pair contains 5. The HL register pair contains 22538. So if we add 22538 plus 5, that should give us 22543, right? And then that result should go into the HL register pair. So this instruction is going to add these two values together and place the result in the HL register pair, which will then be 22543. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. It worked exactly as we expected. So now we have some other instructions that we already know what they do. Load HL brackets comma A, so that's going to load the value that's in the A register into the memory location pointed to by the HL register pair. We've already done that. Let's see if there's any other interesting instructions we can look at. Here's another add HL, comma DE instruction here. Okay, here's a popular instruction that we will definitely need to know in our programming journey, DJNZ. So if you're not already familiar with DJNZ, this is probably, I don't know if it's the most commonly used instruction or not, but it's right up there with them, I'm sure. So DJNZ stands for decrement, jump, not zero. So there's three things right there that we know this thing is looking at. So the first thing it's going to do is decrement. And what is it going to decrement? It's going to decrement the B register. So let's go ahead and change our view to 8-bit registers so we can split out our BC register pair now. So we can see the B register contains 24. And if this instruction decrements the B register, we would expect that B value to go down to 23. Now what else is it going to do? The J part of this instruction means jump. This is technically a relative jump, which if you're not familiar with relative jumps, a relative jump means it can't just jump anywhere it wants to. A jump is like a branch. Let's say in a basic program, for example, you would have a goto command, which you can go to a particular line number. Well, with a basic goto command, you can go to whatever line number you want in the program. And with a regular jump command in assembly language, you can also go to whatever, well, it doesn't use line numbers, but it uses memory addresses in this case. So with a regular jump command, you could normally jump to whatever memory address you want, but in this case the DJNZ command uses what's known as a relative jump, and a relative jump can only jump forwards or backwards a certain distance. It can jump backwards minus 128 addresses or forward 127 addresses. So let's go check this instruction on our Z80 Heaven website, but before we do that, let's take a look at the rest of this instruction, which is NZ or NZ. So that means not zero, and so that is a conditional check. It's going to check something to see if the result is zero. So what it's going to do in this case, it's going to decrement the B register, it's going to check the B register to see if the result is zero, and if it's not zero, then it's going to jump. And it's going to jump where? It's going to jump right here, 33008. And so we need to keep in mind that this 33008 address needs to be within the range of a relative jump. And in this case, it's only jumping back down to here, 33008. So it's well within that range anyway. So now let's go take a look at our Z80 Heaven website. And let's find our DJNZ instruction, which is right here. What does it do? Decreases B, so decrements B, which we just discussed, and jumps to a label if not zero. So we didn't discuss that it jumps to a label, but let's go back in our program and take a look at that, because we discussed, if we look up here, our program contains some labels. Here's a label called main, here's a label called filled screen, and all these pink ones are labels. Here's a label called principal loop, label called move right, label called don't move, all kinds of labels which just are placeholders for memory addresses. So in this case, it says that the DJNZ command jumps specifically to a label. It doesn't say that we can use it to jump to a memory address specifically. So now I'm curious to see if our DJNZ command in our assembly language program is using a label or a specific address. So if we look here, well, there it is right here. It does use a label. It says DJNZ or DJNZ fill screen. So it is in fact jumping to a label. So back to our website here, it says decreases B and jumps to a label if not zero. It says note that DJNZ does a relative jump, so it can only jump between 128 bytes back or ahead. Okay, so we discussed that. And the other thing to make note of is that when it's checking this not zero status, it's not checking the zero flag in the flag register. It's not checking the 0 bit in the flag register, but rather it's directly checking the value of B. So let's go back to our program now, and let's see what this instruction does when we execute it. So first we would expect it to decrement the B register, which is right here, 24. We should expect that to go down to 23. And then if the result is not zero, which it won't be zero because it'll be 23, it will jump to 33008. So let's execute it and see what happens. But first I need to change my program counter. Remember to point at that instruction, which is at 33022. So I'll go up here and change my program counter to 33022, just like that. So now when I click the step button, it should execute this decrement jump not 0 command. And there we can see the DJNZ command. It decremented BC from 24 down to 23, and the result was not 0, so it should have jumped to 33008, which it did. You can see our little green arrow here is pointing to 33008, and also our program counter has changed to indicate 33008 as well. So far everything is making sense. Alright, now what's next? Let's see what else we have here. The next instruction is load C, B. That's simply going to load the contents of the B register into the C register. We can easily check that. We'll just change our program counter here to address 33024 and execute it. And then our C register, which is right here, 22, should contain the value that's in the B register, which is 23. So this 22 should change to 23. So let's check that. And yep, sure enough, that's exactly what it did. Okay, so here we have another push command. Let's just quickly take a look at that. And we'll go back to our stack window here. And our next memory location is 65349. So the value in this memory address should change to whatever the contents of the BC register are. So let's check that out. The BC register, right now it's split up into these two values, so let's put them back together by selecting View and turning off this 8-bit register selection. So now the BC register contains the value 5911, and we would expect that value to now get pushed onto the stack when we execute this command. And so it's going to go right here, 65349. Looking at our registers, here our SP register, which is the stack pointer, that points to the address where the last value was pushed onto the stack. So the last value was pushed onto 65351, and we know that values always get pushed in 2 bytes. So that means 65351 was used up, and 65350 should also have been used up because the stack counts down, remember? So that means theoretically, the next available stack address should be 2 less than this, which is 65349. So let's go check our stack and see if that's true. And yep, there it is right there, 65349. Yep. So now let's go ahead and execute this command, and we should watch the value in the BC register, which is 5911, get pushed onto our stack. And here we go. There we go. 5911 now shows up in our stack. Not too complicated, is it? These instructions are pretty simple. So the next instruction is load HL with this value. So let's go and execute it. Step, and now the value of HL should contain 23278, which it does. It's right there. The next one says load A with a value of 8, and I'll split up these registers now. So A is currently 0. Let's execute this, and A should change to 8. And there it is. A now contains a value of 8. Not too difficult. The next one loads a memory location again with a value of A. We already took a look at that. So we'll just step through that and let it do its thing. Our next instruction is load brackets 32900, HL. So this one is very similar to the load brackets HL command, but instead of using a register pair to indicate a memory address, it's using a specific memory address, which is in this case 32900. So let's take a look at 32900 by just entering it into our address window. And 32900 currently contains the value 228. And if we go back to our program counter address now, which is 33032. So our next instruction is going to load the contents of the HL register pair into this memory address. Now this one is a bit interesting because the contents of the HL register pair are going to be 16 bits. So we're not going to be just loading the value of one memory location, but we're going to need 2 memory locations to hold 16 bits. So in this case, we would expect the contents of the HL register pair to be loaded into memory addresses 32900 and 32901. So let's take a look at our HL register pair. which is right here. We see the H register contains a value of 90, the L register contains a value of 23, and whenever we load 16-bit values into memory, as we discussed in a previous video, the low byte always gets stored first, and the low byte in this case is 23, which is easy to figure out because of the name of the HL register pair stands for high byte and low byte. So the high byte contains 90 and the low byte contains 23. So when we execute this command, we would expect the low byte to be stored in 32900 and the high byte to be stored in 32901. So let's go ahead and execute that right now. Okay. And now let's take a look at that memory location, which is 32900. And here we go, 32900 contains these two values, 238 and 90. Oh, my window is actually not showing me the whole value here. Let me change my view so I can see the values. There, so now it's more visible. So actually the HL register pair contains 90 and 238, not 23. And that's exactly what we see here. The low byte, which is in the L register, which is 238, is here now in location 32900. And the high byte, which is 90, is in 32901. Okay, so let's go back to our program counter address, which is 33035. And let's see what other interesting instructions we can look at here. And hopefully you're finding this interesting, because I find this really interesting. I remember when I was studying electronics back when I was a teenager, I thought that was interesting, but I think Z80 Assembly Language is possibly even more interesting than digital electronics, but maybe there's a tie, I'm not sure. So they're both pretty interesting. So I'm just going to look for any other interesting instructions we can look at that can teach us something here. And the next few are pretty straightforward. We've already looked at those, but look at this one here, EI. At address 33041, we have this EI instruction, which is what I mentioned earlier that we're going to need to watch out for. And this is the enable interrupt instruction. So now, when we're enabling the interrupt, that means we're going to be reading the keyboard again. So let's see what other instructions we can look at here. So this one, LDBC, comma, then this value, that just loads this value into the BC register pair. And oh, here's an interesting one. Okay, this one is one that we're definitely, I think, going to be using in our programming journey, in our game development journey. This says in A, comma C. Let's actually take a look at what that does. So if we look at the Z80 Heaven website again, and we look at the in command, it says it reads a value from a hardware port. So this is a command that the programmer is using to read the value of a key being pressed on the keyboard, which is obviously a very useful operation that we're going to need in game development, right? So I actually have a website here that I have prepared that shows us how this command works. So if we look here, what this is showing us here, this is very useful for us in that it's showing us the keys on the keyboard. And you can see that the keyboard is split up into different sections of rows of keys. So for example, here we have the row on the bottom left, which contains the Shift key, the Z key, the X, C, and V keys. And then the other rows are split in half as well. So this row goes from A to G, this row goes from Q to T. So how we would use this is if we want to read the value of a key being pressed on the keyboard, we would use this in command. So let's take a look at this, and it says bits are set to 0 for any key that is pressed and 1 for any key that is not pressed. If you take these bits here, down here it says the bit will have a value of 1 for any key that is not pressed. So if we press no keys, for example, then all these bits should have a value of 1. So if we execute this in command, then we can do calculations to figure out which key is being pressed. And I'm not going to actually go through all the different values and determine how we can figure out which key is being pressed, but it's enough for us to know at this point for this video that the in command is reading this port, which gives us a value that changes based on which key is being pressed. So here's a port number, and here are the bits that get read when we read the port number. So we use these port numbers in combination with the values that we read using this in command, and that tells us what key is being pressed on the keyboard. And if we look down here, it says how we use this is we enter in A, comma, brackets C, And then what that does is read the port into the accumulator. So it's going to read the value of that row of keys, and it's going to load that value into the accumulator. So let's go back to our emulator now, and we can see that's what this in_a command is going to do. It's going to read a port to determine which key is being pressed on the keyboard. So if we take a look up here, this instruction that says load BC with this value, the reason it's loading this value into BC, if we look back here on our website, how it works is the first thing we do is load BC with a port number, and in this case the port number is FBFE. So these are the port numbers here, and you want to load the BC register pair with a port number. So in this case they're reading this row, QWERT, and then the next instruction where it reads the port into the accumulator, a very useful instruction to have. And you can see that's exactly what he's doing here. He's loading a value into BC. So if we look at our website again, we can see that these port numbers are in hexadecimal. So let's see if we can figure out which bank of keys this program is going to be examining. So if we go back here to our program and we want to convert this 32766 value to hexadecimal, we can just do that here by selecting View Hex Numbers. And now we can see, load BC, he's loading a value of 7FFE. So let's go back to our website now. And which bank is 7FFE? 7FFE, that's right here, it's at the bottom. 7FFE is right here, and that contains the keys space, symbol shift, M, N, and B. So obviously he wants to examine which key is being pressed in this bank of keys ranging from the space bar, or the space key, to the B key, right? So that's interesting. So let's go back now to our emulator. And now we understand exactly what this section of code is doing. It's loading a bank number into the BC register pair, and this bank number corresponds to a section of keys on the keyboard. And then this in_a command is going to load the value of that bank into the A register. And then he's going to compare that value and do manipulations with it to determine what to do in his program. So obviously it's checking to see which key you're pressing on the keyboard to move the car on the screen left and right. So that's how that works. And let's just step through to that instruction. So I'm just going to press step a few times here. Step, step, step. So here we are, we're going to enable the interrupts now. So I'll step over that. So now the interrupts are enabled. And now it's going to load BC with this value. And so if I step over that, BC should now contain that value. And now when I execute this in_a command, the value in the A register will contain the value of that bank that was reading from the keyboard. So let's go and execute that just for fun. And we'll see now the A register contains a value of 191. So that's pretty cool how this instruction works. And you probably want to take note of this instruction if you're not already familiar with it. If you ever plan to read keys on the keyboard, this is how you do it. So let's go back to our emulator. You can see our next line in the program is CP191. What does CP do? Let's go find out. We're going to go look at our Z80 Heaven website, and we're going to search for CP, which is right here. And CP is a subtraction from A that doesn't update A. So it's going to subtract a value from A. But once we do that subtraction, where does the result go? The result goes nowhere, because it says CP is a subtraction from A that doesn't update. So what's the point of doing a subtraction or any calculation if the value is lost? The point of doing that is that it's going to affect the bits in the flag register, which we're going to use to do some comparisons later on in the program, right? So let's just take a look at that here on the website. And here it says affects C, S, and Z or Z flag. C is the carry flag, S is the sign flag, and Z is the 0 flag. So those get modified by whatever happens with our calculation. So if the result of our subtraction causes a carry, or it causes a negative value, or if it causes a 0 value, then it will set these flags. And PV detects overflow. So this means that since the parity overflow bit can either act as parity or overflow, this is just telling us that the parity overflow bit is going to act as an overflow bit. So it says here, detects overflow. And we can see that his next instruction is comparing 191. That's going to subtract 191 from the A register, and then the result is going to set the values of the bits in the flag register. So let's see if we can figure out what we would expect to happen to the bits in the flag register if this instruction gets executed, which it will in one moment. So first we're going to subtract 191 from the A register. Well, what does the A register contain right now? Let's look over here. A register contains 191. So we're going to take 191 and subtract 191 from it. That means the value will be 0. So what effect do we think that will have on the bits in the flag register? Well, for sure there's one bit that we would expect to be affected, which is this 0 bit right here, because since the result will be 0, this flag should turn on, right? The 0 bit should turn on to indicate the result was 0. So let's go ahead and execute it and watch that 0 flag turn on. And remember, this instruction won't affect the contents of the A register, so we wouldn't affect this 191 value of the A register, because it said although it does a subtraction, the result of that subtraction just gets lost and the current value in the A register is not affected. So let's step through this and we'll watch that 0 bit. Bingo, there it is. So the 0 bit popped on, the A register did not change its value, and everything is as we would expect. Pretty cool. Alright, so obviously there are many more instructions we could look at in this program, but most of them are just variations of the instructions that we've already taken a look at, more jump commands and compare commands and things like that. So we're already kind of familiar with them, and you may want to take a look at the rest of the instructions in this program for yourself and see if you can figure out how they work. Maybe go onto the Z80 Heaven website and try and research them and see if you can determine what they do when you use them in your own programs, and you can even experiment with them in the Spin assembler if you want. So that's a great way to figure out how instructions work, is by experimenting with them and try to make your own little programs. But before we end this video, I wanted to go back and do some basic programming. Not much, I just want to show a couple interesting things that we can use in combination with this assembly language program. So let's just finish off this video with a short basic program where we can make some modifications to this racing game and see how we can use basic in combination with our machine code program. And we're also going to have maybe 1 or 2 surprises hidden in there as well. So let's take a look at that. Alright, so there are a couple more cool things we can do before we go. And first, let's just take a look at this program and see how it works a little bit. We haven't actually gone through the listing to examine exactly what every instruction does in terms of how it allows this program to run and what it's doing in the game. But there are a couple things we can look at that would be interesting, I think. And the first thing is, let's take a look at how this program actually works and what it's doing. So here I have the program listing showing up in the window here in the assembler, and over here we have our emulator, and I'm just going to create my program again to run this program. It's already been assembled and stored into memory at location 33,000, which is where our org command up here indicates the program should be stored. So over here in my emulator, I'm going to enter a program line 100, randomize user 33,000, and that's how we execute the machine code program at location 33,000. And so I can run that now, and there you can see our program is running. So exactly what is this program doing? So this program is not actually printing anything on the screen, but rather what it's doing is modifying the color attributes of the screen locations. So this isn't going to be an in-depth tutorial about how the Spectrum screen works or the graphics display works, but basically how the graphics display works is like this. Well, maybe it will be a tutorial. So here we go. I have a little screenshot here. So if we take a look at this image here, it shows the memory map for the Sinclair Spectrum computer. And here it shows the display file right here, and the display file is the area in memory that stores the bytes that the ULA chip copies to the screen in the form of pixels, and you can see that starts here at address 16384 and it goes up to 22527 because 22528 is the beginning of the attribute section of memory, which we'll cover in a moment. So first, let's take a look at the display file. So the display file starts at address 16384 and goes to 22527. And we know that the ULA chip simply copies whatever values are in those memory locations onto the screen. So let's just create a simple program to do that for us. So I'll start my program at line 1000 for f equals 16384 to 22527. And then line 1100, poke f, comma, and we'll use a random number of, let's say, 150, like that. And then 1200, next f. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have probably created this program at some point in your life, probably about 30 years ago, but let's just run it and see what happens. And I'm going to change the emulator speed to 28 megahertz just so it runs a bit more quickly. So let's run it on line 1000 and see what happens. So there you can see it's filling the screen with this graphics character, well, with this byte of data, which is 150, which represents this pattern of pixels that you see. So that's how it fills the screen. And actually, let me slow down that CPU speed again to the original speed, and we'll run that again. So there you can see how the screen fills its graphics display memory line by line, and then it goes thirds by thirds of the screen. And we're not going to go into too much detail about that in this video, because in particular what I'm interested in is this next section here, which is the attribute section of memory here, which runs from 22528 to 23296. So if I create another for next loop, let's say I change these values for f equals 22528 to 23295, and then I'll poke those memory addresses with the value of 150, and we'll see what happens. So there you can see it's filling the screen line by line, block by block, character position by character position with this particular attribute. So these memory locations contain the color attributes of these positions on the screen. And in this particular example, it looks like I've chosen a paper and ink color of yellow and red. I'm not sure which one is which. And then the flash attribute is turned on, so it's flashing between yellow and red. And if I were to modify this program now and choose a different value of, let's say, 12, and run it again, you can see it fills the screen with the color of blue. So that is how this racing program works actually also. What it does is, instead of printing characters to the screen, it's only changing the attributes of those screen positions. So the black pattern that represents the road outline is actually a screen attribute of a black color, and then the blue block representing the car is a screen attribute of blue. So that's how the program works in general. And the first thing I want to do is take a look at how we can modify the program a little bit. What if we want to print a red car? So let's take a look at our assembly language program here and see what we can figure out. So if you look at our assembly language program here, I'll just zoom it in a bit, and we go down to this section here, where here you can see it says print car. So the way it's printing the car on the screen, as we just discussed, it's not actually printing anything on the screen. All it is loading a value into the attributes section of the computer memory, which changes the paper and ink color of that particular section of the screen, as well as the flash attributes or the brightness attributes. And let's take a look at exactly how it does that. So you can see here the line that says print car. All it does, it loads a value of 8 into the A register, and then it's going to poke that value into the attributes display memory. But what is that value of 8? Because the car is blue, but the color blue is number 1 on the keyboard, right? It's not number 8 on the keyboard. So where does that number 8 come from? Well, it comes from here. So this is the byte that represents the value that gets poked into the attribute section of memory to change the colors on the screen. And these different bits tell us what the different colors will be. So bits D0, D1, and D2, they represent the ink color because they're labeled I0, I1, and I2. So those will change the ink color of that location on the screen. And then these bits, D3, D4, and D5, those represent the paper color. So whatever value these bits contain will determine the paper color, and they're labeled P0, P1, and P2. And then here we have bit D6, which is labeled B, and B stands for brightness. So if that bit is set, then that particular location on the screen will be bright. And then finally bit D7 here is labeled F, which represents flash. So if that bit is set, then that bit will flash. So if we look at this value of 8 that we're using to print that car color attribute of blue, how would 8 show up in this byte for the attributes? Well, if we take a look here, we should know by now, if we remember our bits, bytes, and hexadecimal video, that a value of 8 in decimal represents a binary value of 0, 0, 0, 1. And how do we know that? Because these bits have a decimal value of, well, let me see if I can put it here, of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and 128. So since the value that we're using to print the car as blue has a value of 8 right here, so a value of 8 represents this bit right here, which we can see represents the P0 bit, which is the first bit in the paper color. So the paper color in this case would have a value of 100, or I can put it down here, 100, because the value of this entire byte is 8 from our print car instruction here. So in order to get a value of 8 for this entire byte, it would look like this. So we would have 0, 0. Sorry, I know this printing looks horrible, but all these bits would be 0 except for this P0 bit right here. So right here, this P0 bit is the only one that's set, and that gives this entire byte a value of 8, which is the value that we're using to print the car right here. So if we poke a value of 8 into an attribute memory location, we should get a color blue, because the color blue is number 1. So the paper bits here contain a total value of 1. So these 3 bits right here, they contain a value of 1, which represents a color of 1, which is blue. So that's how we're able to print a blue square to represent the car. So what if we want to change the color of the car to red now? What value would we need to have in this attribute byte to represent red? Well, red on the keyboard is number 2, so we need these 3 bits, P0, P1, and P2, to now have a value of 2. And to get a value of 2, that means this P1 bit would now have to be 1. And then this P0 bit would now have to be 0. And the P2 bit still remains 0. So now our entire byte value, if we fill in zeros for the rest of these bits, just like that, then this entire byte value would be 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So this bit here has a value of 16, as we can see from right up here. This bit represents a value of 16. So theoretically, if we change this 8 value here in our line of code in our assembly language program, if we change that to 16, then our car should turn red. So let's just move this out of the way, and we'll shrink this back down. And now the question becomes, okay, we know that we need to change that value from 8 to 16, but how do we know where that value is in memory? So let's take a look at our debugger again by going up here to Tools, and we'll open the debugger. And now let's see if we can find this instruction. So this instruction is LD8. So we know our program starts at memory address 33,000. So let's just go over here and search at 33,000. And we'll just scroll down until we find LDA8. So it looks like it's actually stored in 2 locations here in our program, which is here at address 33029. There's an instruction LDA, 8, And then down here again at 33076, there's an instruction LDA, 8. And if we look in our program over here, at the top, we have an instruction here, LDA, 8, which is after this initialize car instruction. So I guess it's initializing the value of the car color up there as well. And then lower down, where it says print car here, it's using it again. So that would make sense. In our debugger output, it also shows two locations here at 33029 and 33076. It uses this value of 8 being loaded into the A register to indicate the color of the car. So we need to modify two memory locations in this case. And the first one is here, 33029. Well, that contains the instruction, which is code 62. So this 8 value here, right here, is actually stored at memory address 33030. So let's change that first. So we need to poke a value of 16 into 33030. So poke 33030, 16 should give us our first entry. And then if we open our debugger again and see where our next one is here, and then our next one, see our first one here has changed now. It's LDA, 16. So our first change has already taken effect. And then our next one is where? Here. Address 33076 contains 62. So the next address, 33077, would contain this 8 that we need to change. So we need to poke this 8 into 33077. So I'll go back here and poke 33077, 16. And now let's open up our debugger one last time and just confirm that those changes took effect. So we go to 33077, and there is our value of 16 that we just entered. So good. So now, theoretically, our car should print in red instead of blue. So let's give that a try. So do I still have my program here? No, I don't. So I'll type randomize user 33,000, and that will run our program, hopefully with a red car. And there we go. Now we have a red car instead of a blue car. Great. Now one more thing we want to do, which is really interesting, and if you haven't already used this, or if you're not already aware of this next technique, this is something that's pretty interesting, which is if we take a look here in our program, we can see here that there's a line near the end where it says game over that says pop BC retrieve score. So remember how we discussed earlier how we use the push and pop commands to load values onto the stack and retrieve values from the stack. So here it looks like it's popping a value off of the stack, and it's got a note here that says retrieve score. So it looks like this game keeps track of the score. And if you read the instructions for this game on the author's website, then you will find out that it does actually keep track of the score. And we can see here that the score is being saved in the BC register pair, but it's not printing it on the screen, you'll notice, when we play the game in machine code. So how can we actually extract that score and use it to print on the screen from BASIC? Well, I've actually figured that out, and I'm going to load a BASIC program that I created that has some interesting modifications we can take a look at. And the way I'm going to load that is by going up here to File, Load Snapshot, and a snapshot loads both a BASIC program and the contents of the memory location. So I'm going to load a snapshot here. And here we have the BASIC program that I created. And it's a very short program, so let's just go through it and see what it does. So we can see first at line 15 here, it prints a title called Chutney Racer. And then below that, it prints some graphics to show us what controls are used in the game. And then here at line 100, it says randomize USR 30,000. So that's kind of a surprise that we're going to be looking at in an upcoming video, but I'll just let you know what that does now is that is a subroutine that I created that changes the border color. And we're going to call that using this randomize user command, just as we would call any other machine code subroutine. And then after it changes the border color, it comes back to BASIC and it goes to the next line, which is here, line 110, where it says let score equal USR 33,000. So if you don't already know what that does, this is pretty interesting to learn, which is how this works is what the USR command does is it retrieves the value of the BC register pair. So that's pretty cool. It actually extracts a value from a machine code register pair that we can use in our basic program, and we can use it just like a variable. So instead of using the randomize user command to call our machine code program, we're going to use this USR 33,000 as part of our basic line that assigns a value to this variable called score. And the way it does that is when the computer calls a machine code subroutine, it returns the value that's in the BC register. And so if we look at our program over here, we can see that our assembly language program pops a value off of the stack and loads it into the BC register pair. And the note here says it retrieves the score. So obviously it's taking the score off of the stack and putting it into the BC register pair for us to use in our basic program. And this is how we can do that. We can consider this USR 33,000 instruction kind of like a variable. So when we execute this USR 33,000 piece of code, what it's going to do is return whatever value is in the BC register pair. And we can use that just like a value. So we're going to, in this case, store that value into this variable called score. So then after we run the program and the program finishes running and we've crashed our car, when it returns back to basic, it will bring that value that's in the BC register pair with it. And here we're assigning it to this numeric variable of score, which we can then print on our screen. So let's go to our next line here, which is just a clear screen in line 120. And then in line 140, we have another randomize user 40,000 command, which is another surprise, which again just changes the border color of the screen. No big deal. And then when it comes back from doing that, at line 150 here, we print at 10.1, your score is score. So now we're using that score variable, which is now loaded with the previous contents of the BC register pair from our machine code program. And then here at the end at line 200, we just have a pause. So let's go ahead and run this program now, and we'll see this all in action. So first it prints the main game screen with my little title here and the controls outlined here. And in this case, it says V is left and B is right. Although if you are familiar with that code that we looked at earlier that uses the in command to grab the value of the key being pressed on the keyboard, you'll notice that this program will actually work no matter which key you press in that half of that line on the keyboard. So instead of using V, for example, Z, X, C, and V would all work the same as the V key. And similarly, instead of pressing just the B key, any of the keys from the B to the right hand side of that line on the keyboard would work as well. But in this case, I've just used V and B to simplify things. And also those are comfortable keys because they're close together. And then it's waiting for me to press a key to start. And now when I press a key, it's going to execute the machine code program by calling it at address 33,000. So let's press a key. And now you can see the border has turned blue because of that first machine code program that I called, which is that little surprise that I mentioned. And now since I've crashed, the program has changed the border color to green, which is the second randomize user command that I showed you earlier. And now you can see that our score is being printed here on the screen because it was returned in the BC register pair, which we then saved in our score variable, and now we can print it on the screen. So I think that is super cool, and that's a great way we can interface our basic programs with a machine code program. So let's try this again and see if I can do any better than 120 points.